2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate.
At least 300,000 people have been displaced by the catastrophe.
The industrial chemical is normally used in agriculture as a fertilizer.
This explosion was absolutely colossal.
What is ammonium nitrate? A fertilizer for crops? How is it that something so simple could turn into something so lethal? In this episode of the What Is series, we are going to discuss how ammonium nitrate, if misused, can potentially be a threat to our lives. Let's go. Ammonium nitrate is a salt commonly used as a fertilizer in agriculture to increase the nitrogen content in crops as it helps them grow. It is a chemical compound formed by the two ions of ammonium and nitrate. It is also considered relatively stable under most conditions, which means it does not rapidly lose nitrogen to the atmosphere. It's labeled as an oxidizing agent, meaning it's really rich in oxygen. Now, why is this important? Well, it essentially means that it accelerates the burning of flammable materials, even in the absence of air, because we know burning requires oxygen. Of course, it has to come in contact with them. But even then, unless it is contaminated in some sort of way, ammonium nitrate cannot burn on its own. That's why there are strict regulations for what should be stored beside ammonium nitrate and the conditions under where it should be stored. Which leads me to my next point. When it's put in high enough temperatures, ammonium nitrate can violently decompose. This process creates gases including nitrogen oxides and water vapor. It is this rapid release of gases that unfortunately might lead to a violent explosion. It also tends to cake up under humid atmospheres, which increases the threat and danger of the substance due to the high pressure conditions. Of course, the larger the quantity in one place, the higher the risk of detonation. So it should be stored in relatively small quantities and moved around frequently. So after I mentioned these important properties, what do you think it's used for? Obviously, as we mentioned, it is extremely important as a fertilizer in agriculture, as it's inexpensive to manufacture, making the chemical a popular alternative to other more expensive nitrogen sources. There are also niche uses for this chemical, where it's put in cold packs and at some point airbags, but were recalled as unsafe after killing 14 people. But remember when I said it can violently explode under certain conditions? Well, this property can't go unnoticed. Ammonium nitrate is actually used widely as a bulk industrial explosive for mining and construction, or for actual harm. It can be mixed up with fuel oil, a flammable material called AMFO, and be turned into a bomb for warfare uses or actual terrorism. Fertilizer bombs, as a result, are quite common for terrorist attacks. Another example of this is Ammotel, where ammonium nitrate is mixed with TNT to give the same result. All of these conditions unfortunately were not met in Lebanon, which has suffered recently from an ammonium nitrate explosion in its Beirut port. The explosion was met with tragic losses in the country and resulted in 300,000 homeless people. But let's rewind for a moment and explain what the explosion can tell us about its nature at each phase. While we don't know for sure what caused the explosion, footage of the incident indicates it might have been set off by a fire, visible in a section of the city's port area before the explosion happened. The dark black smoke shows the intensity of the fire that was present before the explosion. As we mentioned before, it's relatively difficult for a fire to trigger an ammonium nitrate explosion unless it has been contaminated with or packaged with some other combustible material. The fire would also need to be sustained and confined within the same area for a long period of time under a really high temperature. It's been reported that 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate were stored in the warehouse for 6 years without proper safety controls, which might explain the contamination we just talked about. The 6-year period can additionally be another reason for how the chemical compound might have dissociated over time and became potentially dangerous. We can see the ignition right before the explosion here. An ammonium nitrate explosion is known for producing massive amounts of nitrogen oxides. Nitrogen dioxide, or NO2, is a red, bad-smelling gas, which is the reddish color you see here. These nitrogen oxides are commonly present in urban air pollution and can irritate the respiratory system, but will dissipate in the air in a couple of days or weeks depending on the weather. So until now, according to this footage, we can only conclude that there were fumes from the fire plus an initial trigger, along with mixed conditions of massively stored, pressurized and contaminated ammonium nitrate that made it combustible itself or combusted along with something else. But then notice, there is a massive blast wave in the shape of a white cloud spreading in all directions. This blast wave results from a pressurized and explosive core expanding supersonically outward. Usually, strong explosives and bombs detonate and generate such blast waves, so this might hint at what was beside or with the ammonium nitrate, because this couldn't have happened by itself. To demonstrate the explosion from another angle, here's a similar explosion that happened in Syria 7 months ago, which gives us a better look at what we actually mean. This is the white cloud I was talking about earlier, and this is the way it spreads in all directions. We can also notice that the explosion in Beirut occurred on the sea, which absorbed 50 to 70% of the damage it might have caused in the Lebanese capital. Otherwise, if it were in the midst of the city could have been completely destroyed. It is still very important to understand that such tragedies are really hard to ascertain what is behind them. Toulouse, France, to this day, since 2001's ammonium nitrate explosion, after thorough investigations, still do not know what the initial reason and conditions for the explosion were. So unfortunately, any hasty conclusions in such cases would be considered impulsive and thoughtless. And you might think this is a rare sighting, but over history, several similar explosions have occurred, most notably in 2015 in the city of Tianjin, China. An explosion happened after flammable substances and ammonium nitrate were stored together in a chemical factory, leading to 173 deaths. It's been reported that there were 800 tons of ammonium nitrate that led to this explosion. For comparison's sake, 2,750 tons of it were stored in Beirut, and you can see the massive crater it left behind after the explosion in China. And this is a side-by-side comparison. Similar explosions have also happened in Texas back in 1947, tragically killing at least 580 people, and Toulouse, as we mentioned, killing 37. For something that was initially produced to revolutionize and consumerize the agriculture industry, companies and countries are now looking at other alternatives that might be safer for the general public to handle. Governments are imposing tighter regulations and rules around the storage conditions and location of ammonium nitrate. Canada, for example, just announced that they were reviewing their ammonium nitrate stocks and assured their residents of the regulations and safety measures in place. Egypt also announced that they moved their ammonium nitrate stockpiles that were in the airport, somewhere safer and more isolated. As the world tries to phase out of the use of ammonium nitrate, it'll be interesting to see what alternatives they choose in the future to avoid such tragedies and loss of lives. So thank you for watching. This is a new series I'm trying out, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and turn on the bell icon to get notified when I release new videos. I'll see you in the next one.